Hmm. Okay. Um, Within the auto space, uh, what have you encountered, and what would be your kind of word of admonishment to our audience?
So in the auto space, one of the biggest things that I have seen is people have a tendency to turn in a lot of claims because that's what they're paying for, which I completely understand. But if it can be settled out of, the insurance realm, I would recommend that. If it was not at fault, I would wait and try to see if you can get the other person's insurance to pay for it, because after so many losses, even if they are not at fault, we have had a lot of people get non-renewed by their high net worth carrier because they've paid out for several occurrences. And
Hmm.
that's definitely a pain point for some people. And another thing is just make sure with the high net worth carrier, they offer what's called agreed value. So if you drive, this new Urus, Lamborghini, I think it's Lamborghini Urus. If you drive that and you don't have agreed value, they're going to cut you a check for whatever replacement cost is. Well, what we're finding is a lot of these cars are on back order. So people are having to scramble because in the state of Texas, once your car is totaled, you have to turn in the rental car the next day unless you can work out a deal. So if you don't have that money in hand and you're not able to replace it with like kind and quality, you may be in, a heap of trouble for 6 months while that car is on order. Another thing that we have had issues with are some cars have been totaled with this chip shortage, and they don't have enough agreed value. So I highly recommend all of my insureds, if they purchase a new car, send your agent the bill of sale. It's better for us to insure it for what you paid for it than for us to guess or the system to put a lower number. It's easy. You can scan it, email it, text it to your agent, just so they know how much you paid for it, and you can make sure that you have adequate agreed value. And if you have a car that, isn't necessarily a collector car, I have a gentleman that has a 1999 Ferrari, and every few months he gets a magazine that evaluates Ferraris. And so he sends me the article that says, we've got it at 100 right now. We need to be at 130. Mm-hmm. Little things like that. Just keep an eye on the agreed value of your vehicles because it can fluctuate. And with this shortage, we are seeing more and more cars not be readily available. They're not getting enough after a loss, and it's creating a headache.
Mm. So did I hear you right that just because of the chip shortage, the car was totaled, or am I misinterpreting that?
Oh, no, sorry. I probably misspoke. No,
and because of the chip shortage, they're not able to get the replacement.
Yeah, they weren't able to get a replacement, and they had to turn in the car the next day, the rental car, because they totaled the car. Mm-hmm. And then they were arguing that they couldn't find anything similar for that amount of money. So I always tell people, review your policy every year because cars can fluctuate rapidly.
Got it. And especially with the vehicle market the way it has been the last 2 years.
Yes.
That probably has not aided.
It's not helping.
So what about with regard to umbrella policies and liability coverage? It's not. This has always been kind of a harping spot for me, just because it's one of the pieces that I think gets underlooked at within a plan. And as soon as I see ATVs, a pool, anything that has to do with shared use, I get really nervous if I don't see a certain dollar amount. Could you give kind of how you all view that market and the appropriate level of coverage?
So what I recommend, and this is kind of where you come in, I recommend people look at their assets and determine, what somebody could come after you for. If you're worth $10 million on paper, you need to look at a $10 to $15 million umbrella. A lot of people tell me all the time that, here in Texas, they can't sue you for this or that. You would be surprised. We are in a litigation happy society. I had a young lady that was driving a vehicle, and the parents said it was the steering column that collapsed. The police say it was drugs and alcohol, but what resulted was the passenger of the young driver was killed in a car accident. It paid out a $10 million policy limit from the parents' umbrella. And it was very painful for the parents. But thankfully, I had advised them in advance, anytime you have young drivers, ATVs, jet skis, watercrafts, a pool, diving board, a slide, anything that creates an exposure for yourself, I highly recommend you carry an umbrella. Most carriers, once you reach the $5 million limit, they actually give you a credit on your homeowner's policy for high net worth. And it becomes kind of a wash for the additional premium for what you save. But I personally, I don't have a ton of assets, but I personally have a pool with a diving board and a little child. So I have $1 million umbrella. I tell everybody, even if you're not worth a ton of money, just a basic umbrella is worth it. Liability, you can increase it up to usually around $1 million on a homeowner's or an auto policy. And it's so cheap. Liability is the cheapest thing you're going to pay for in insurance. And it's the best peace of mind when you go to bed at night, whether you have young drivers or you have any exposure, even if you don't think you have exposure, it's there and people are ready to sue you because of anything that they can find, whether that be somebody, the Amazon guy comes up to your front porch and slips because you have a Christmas light plug out, and the cord's not taped down, anything. I mean, it just takes 2 seconds. Or you're in your car and somebody gets hurt.
It's not uncommon for me to hear someone say, "Oh, well, I only let our friends use this jet ski," or "I only let our friends use." Well, I always ask, hey, do you know the lawyer associated with their insurance policy, and how well do you know him? Because he's the one you need to get to know. Your friend has nothing to do with this. He's outsourced this to another carrier. So, when you put it in kind of that framework, which may be morbid, but it's
true,
a little bit more realistic.
It's true. It's very true. And, I hate to use scenarios. I've been obviously doing this way too long. But my cousin, he and his best friend were on jet skis. They were 16 at the time. And they were playing around and they'd been best friends since kindergarten. They collided and unfortunately my cousin didn't survive. And my aunt, depression and grief do crazy things to people. And she ended up suing the family. And she had been close family friends with them for a long time. So I always tell people, even if it's your best friend, even if it's a relative, you don't know what's going to happen after a loss. You don't know what's going to be going through their mind. And I would rather you not find out and have to write a personal check when you could have just paid a little extra throughout the years, just to make sure that you have the liability coverage that you really need.
So on this uplifting topic, let's move to the fun stuff. So personal valuables.
Yes.
This is one of those topics that no one seems to think that they have enough of whatever the quantity is or whatever the item is to insure it at the time. And I always use Dick Cheney said when they asked him how many guns he had, he said, "More than I need, not as many as I want." And there's quite a few folks that, might fall into that category, given the fact that you live in Texas, or whether it be jewelry or whether it be watches, art, things of that nature. So, how would you set the table just to make sure that our audience has just a basic framework of, hey, if you've got any question in the back of your head, these are the things that you need to start looking at and accruing some value to, and here's the next step.
Yeah, sure. So if I have a lot of people, oh, I bought this, oh, it doesn't really add up. But then once they start cataloging things, they realize that it adds up very quickly. If they don't necessarily want to itemize everything, you can do what most high net worth carriers will allow you to do. It's called a blanket.
Okay.
So that means you set a dollar amount and then you get a per item limit amount after a loss. But that way you don't have to schedule everything individually. It's great for wine. It's great for art. It's great for guns. It's great jewelry, pretty much anything that you can think of. We have a lot of people, they don't necessarily want to cover everything because, what are the chances their entire collection is going to get stolen? Well, chances are slim. But with art, that's a little more complicated. Most people say, oh, nobody's going to come in and yank it off the wall. No, but if you have a sprinkler system in your house and the sprinkler systems go off and that art gets damaged, or you put it, in an area that it gets beat down by the sun and it gets faded. And, there's so many things that I tell people if it's over, $5,000, $10,000 and you would be upset if something happened to it, then you absolutely need to insure